And welcome everybody to God's Views on Political News. This is January 2018, Bill. What happened to 2017?
Well, I don't know what happened to 2017, but a lot happened in 2017, didn't it? Yeah,
it went pretty fast.
Yeah, well, the news here in East Tennessee is it's cold. I mean, it's really, really cold. So all that global warming stuff,
It's real. See, I just heard in the news that if we don't get back on that Paris, climate change agreement, then the world is going to be a desert, Bill. So just so you know.
Well, it's a frozen desert today, at least where I live. You know, it was, and there are people up in International Falls, Minnesota, how they live there during the winter, I have no idea. I mean, because it's like negative 35. It was 5 this morning, and I just did not want to get up. I mean, it was just, I don't want to go out there. But anyway, that's what's going on here.
I guess it's the definition of living, because to me, that's not living. Today it's right now, it's 10 o'clock in California, and it's really cold here. It's 61.
I don't like you, Susan.
We're only going to get a high of 81 today.
Well, it's cold when you are looking forward to the projected highs for tomorrow, which are going to be 36. So we're like, oh, yes, great. It's going to be above freezing. Yeah, we're warming up. So
we can take off one of the 5 layers that we have on, right?
I had to dig out my long john. So anyhow.
Well, I'm sorry. We have free pot not free pot in California, but it's legal now. So, we've got some really great things here in California for 2018.
Okay. Well, yeah. Why don't you share a couple of those?
I don't want to. I just want to cry about it. I really do.
I did see a sign that, it looked official that it was on the highway. What is it? 5 between Vegas and LA. About welcome to California, sanctuary state. What is it? Illegals and
MS-13.
Yeah, you're all welcome.
Yeah, Democrats need the votes. Yeah, there's a guy that's an artist, and they think that he put that sign out there. It's a real sign. So he's probably the one of 2 conservatives left in California that are out there putting up those signs. But it's so true, and it's sickening that California state is a sanctuary state. That we have pot that's sold here for recreational pot that's legal. Also, I'm not a big fan of Jack in the Box anymore, because Jack in the Box is promoting a Merry Munchie meal at $4.20. No, nothing there was not intentional, and it's for people who are high on pot. They can just come in and get garbage food.
Yeah, right. Well, everyone is joining us, looks like here. And
yes.
So hello to everybody.
Yeah, hello, everybody. And please feel free to make comments and also to ask questions during the program. Marlene said it's cold there in Central Florida, too. So happy New Year to everybody. And hopefully that you get to warm up, and that, February Groundhog Day, it gives you good news there in the East Coast. That would be great. I want to start out talking about Iran, because, there's a lot going on in Iran, and it seems like our media either is one ignoring it, hey Beth, or if they're not ignoring it, then they're kind of on the side of the Iranian regime. What has been happening over the last, 5 or 6 days now, is that people have taken to the streets and they're protesting what's going on in Iran. And I tell you, Bill, really what I see that they're protesting is they know that we in the United States gave them all of that money back. It was, I don't know how much it was, over $400 million.
Oh, no, I was thinking it was in the billions.
It could have been. It just kept adding more and more and more. But they just, I think what they did with that money in Iran is they took it, and instead of giving it to the people, they continued to promote terrorism and use that money to fund terrorism.
Like 78, 79, just in reverse. If you remember back
Yeah.
when the Ayatollah was in France, and he came from France after on the heels of the Islamic Revolution there, and the Shah has to flee and all these kinds of things. So it has you get the sense that that's what's happening, except in reverse now. What we sometimes will forget, and I mean, Bible students are pretty guilty of this. We'll look at things that the scripture has to say about Persia or Egypt or Syria, in a negative light as it relates to Israel, coming against Israel and these kinds of things. And we forget sometimes that in Persia and in Egypt and in Syria, there are just people. There are moms and dads and sons and daughters and uncles and grandparents that are like everyone else, just struggling to make a living, to raise their family, things like that. And so that is what's really jumped out to me about this, is that, in Iran, as evil as it is with the leaders that it has, as anti-Israel, anti-US as it is, there are still people that are in the country that really, that's not what they're about. They're just about trying to raise their kids, and make a living. So that's the first thing that appeals to me. And the second thing is that we can speculate as to what the Obama administration's motive was for releasing all these funds to try to secure this, somewhat stability with Iran. Of course, we know that that's a joke. And I think it was a few weeks ago, you brought out something about what you thought that was all about. And it just shows you that with all of their agenda and what they were trying to do and what they were trying to accomplish with releasing these funds to the mullahs in Iran, they could not have foreseen what's happening right now. Well, we'll have to see how this pans out. But what I'm getting at is this. The adversary has his agenda. He has his plans. But then God has his.
Yeah.
And if this follows through, we don't know, but if this follows through and there is a significant political upheaval in Iran, it'd just be interesting to see how it affects what we suppose the Obama administration was trying to do where Iran is concerned. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, you're making sense. And I think whether they intentionally wanted things to happen or not, I mean, what has happened is, we've seen Iran, who's been able, with this quote unquote great agreement, that the Obama administration entered into, and getting this money back. We've, in my opinion, we've been able to see them go around the agreement and give money to North Korea to make nuclear weapons, give money perhaps to Russia to make nuclear weapons. I mean, they can go and buy the nuclear weapons. They don't have to make them themselves. And part of the agreement is, they're not going to make the nuclear weapons. They don't have to. They can just pay for somebody else to do it.
And I think what we talked about several weeks ago was that this was perhaps Obama's way of stacking the deck against Israel without doing it directly, going around, doing an end around, releasing the funds to Iran, knowing full well what they're going to do with it. They're not going to do good with it. They're going to have something that furthers their agenda, and that is prominently anti-Israel. So this was just Obama's way of coming against Israel indirectly. But if that is what was happening, this upheaval in Iran has the potential. I'm not saying it will for certain because we don't know, but it has the potential to upset any agenda that the heads of state in Iran have where Israel is concerned, at least for right now. Because we don't have any idea what was going on behind closed doors in Iran, and then all of a sudden there's this uprising.
Yeah, well, and you look at it too. You have Iran right now still in Syria, and because of the money that they were given, they have enough money to make that their military base right there in Damascus, and to stock it full of weapons there. So I mean, it to me, there wasn't anything good about the nuclear agreement at all, and I think what we're going to see is I think President Trump is going to use this occasion as a reason to get rid of that nuclear agreement. I think he's going to say, look, this is not helping the country. The money did not go to the people. It's not benefiting the Iranian people at all. And we should get rid of that agreement and let's find a new one. Let's renegotiate, if you will, and have a better agreement that's going to keep and hold Iran accountable, because they're not being held accountable right now.
Well, I think that he's already kind of hinting at something like that in the tweets that's coming out in the last day or two. You know, it's kind of putting it out there in people's minds that all this money that the United States gave them, donated to them, whatever the right word is, didn't benefit the Iranian people in any way. So perhaps you're right there.
Yeah,
I think he should.
Yeah, I do too. Because and Congress should have acted a long time ago and said to Obama, even afterwards when they found out, because I don't think they knew too much about it when it was going on, but afterwards they should have said, no, we're not going to accept this disagreement. We're not going to go along with it. And we're going to create a new agreement because this is bad for our country as well. But they didn't do that, you know, because there was a Democrat run for a while, and those people who were Republicans were afraid to speak out against Obama. Now, Linda here says Russia now has uranium to make and sell weapons. We got that. That goes back to Uranium One that, Linda, we need to look into with the DOJ and see what's going on there and what happened and why our State Department sold 20% of our uranium. Joey is joining us from South Africa, and he says, good evening. So good evening, Joey. Glad that you can make it with us. What I wanted to say, too, is here's what President Trump did tweet out recently. He said, Iran is failing at every level, despite the terrible deal made with them by the Obama administration. The great Iranian people have been repressed for many years. They are hungry for food and for freedom. Along with human rights, the wealth of Iran is being looted. And in all caps, with an exclamation point at the end, he said, time for change.
Well, again, it seems that Trump, and this is not the most astute observation. I think people have seen this for a while now, but it seems that Trump starts tweeting things which grow. They snowball until it becomes an agenda, which becomes a policy. So I think that might be where this is headed. And as I said, I think it should. I mean, you don't make deals with the devil. You don't make a covenant with death. And we've done that. It needs to be shut down. Hopefully he will do that. And let's go back to something you mentioned earlier we haven't really talked a whole lot about, and that's the fact the media really isn't they're not representing the story to the United States properly, if at all. Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
Well, we know what that is, right? They're right. They step in concert with the Obama agenda and the liberal and progressive agenda. America is the problem in the world. We're the ones that caused all the problems, and we need to be brought down, cut down to size somewhat. And so they're not going to do anything that's going to make Obama and the progressives look bad, which then it just continually exposes their, what's the word I'm looking for here? The cancer that they have become in our culture, to shape people's minds, especially younger people, because if it's on television or if it's on the internet, it must be true.
Right.
So, I mean, they're cancer, and I'm speaking in general terms here. Mm-hmm. It's a cancer in our nation's culture and the mindset, and particularly the younger people. But they rock on. They continue doing what they do.
Well, and even in this article with the New York Times in regards to what's going on in Iran, again, they're more supportive of the regime, although they say, well, we really do want change. However, we don't want President Trump doing anything about it, because the only thing he's going to do is make it worse. So, I mean, they take an opportunity at every chance that they get to disparage this president and what he's trying to do. They were saying one of the reasons that we don't want him to do anything is because, the Iranian people don't like him anyway, because he's banned a lot of them from coming to the United States, and he's put in sanctions against Iran. And I think it misses the point with the New York Times there, because as you were saying, Bill, in the very beginning, people are not the government of Iran. And I've met a lady who ran from Iran in 1979 when she could flee from there. And she said, that's one thing that she wanted people to know, that the people of Iran don't support the government. They don't go along with it. And you can't, it's just like those people who were conservatives who didn't see them aligning themselves with Obama administration policies. So we are here, but it doesn't mean that we agree with what our government is doing. And they don't in Iran either.
Well, I know a gentleman lives out in West Texas. He's a physician, and his family fled from Iran, in the 70s. And he would be one of the first to tell you, that the mullahs and the ayatollahs and all these people that, make these rants against the United States and against Israel don't necessarily speak for the rank and file Iranian. Or in fact, he actually refers to himself as a Persian, not an Iranian.
Wow.
So, and that's what I was trying to say, and I'm guilty of this too. I can look at Iran as a whole and see it as evil and forget that there are people, there are Christians, there are believers in Iran and Syria and Egypt and all these different countries. And those people, they do not escape God's eye. You think about when the fall of the Soviet Union came about. After, 70 years of oppression, and all these believers had meet underground behind closed doors, were tormented, were persecuted, and their prayers were going up before God. And then finally one day he said, that's enough. And almost overnight, the Soviet Union fell. So I can't help but wonder if this is, and again, we'll have to wait and see how things pan out, but I can't help but wonder if this is God giving those believers that are under this oppressive government that window of opportunity, and people rising up to, at the very least, make their dissension known right now. And I read or heard that even some of the government's police force were refusing to engage these people.
Yeah.
They were just disobeying orders and wouldn't engage these people, which tells me, and I'm not an analyst, I'm not a big political guy in that respect, but it tells me that the Iranian government has big problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and we're going to be seeing more and more of that. I know there have been meetings that have been called from the president of Iran and with meeting with other clerics and saying, what do we do? We have an issue here. 20 people have died already, and, more are going to come. They're not going to allow this to go on. They aren't. But one thing that you mentioned that I think that is interesting is that, for a long time now, the people of Iran have been very kind of more secular in their viewpoints rather than religious in any one type of faith or the other in some respects. And I heard when listening to a pastor from Calvary Chapel recently just said that in Iran now, people are coming to the Lord in record numbers, that they are turning to Christianity. And, maybe some of that is what we're seeing on the street, where people say, this is not how we're to live under the Christian principles. And maybe that's, why some of the people are coming out there. And you're not going to hear, they may say that you're funding terrorism and we don't like you giving that money away. Maybe they're saying we don't like you funding terrorism at all.
Well, I saw yesterday a video, and it was translated from Farsi, so I'll have to take this person's word for it.
Right.
But it was these people were chanting in the streets that we are Persians, we are not Arabs. And what this person was saying, that what they were meaning by that is that we're Persians, we're not Muslims. Because, Islam came from the Arabian Peninsula. It came from the Arabian people. and then it permeated that entire region, Iran or Persia included. But that spoke a lot to me that there's this, at least a segment of these dissenters who are saying, look, we're Persians, we're not Arabs, we're not supposed to be Muslims. Now, does that mean that they're trying to be true believers? I don't know. But I do think that anytime something like this is happening, if it does in fact prosper in the sense that more liberties are gained, that it's because behind the scenes there's a group of people that have been in shackles, they've been oppressed, they've been tortured, that have been crying out to God for justice. I guarantee you that's really what's going on behind here. Now, here comes Trump. I mean, I'll say it again. I am not going to say that Trump is a man of God. I don't know the man's heart, but I will say that he's God's man right now. And, a lot of people have been saying, or were saying leading up to the election in 2016, people prophesying that Trump was kind of like a Cyrus. I'm not going to say I agree or disagree, but that's what people were saying. Here's what's interesting. With this uprising, and Trump being in the position that he is in right now, and taking the position that he's taking right now, interestingly, it would be fascinating to see if Trump ends up being a Cyrus, who was a Persian king, if he ends up being a Cyrus for Persians at this particular time. So again, we're going to have to wait and see what happens. But it's just kind of, God does things in such a way that it's just, not only does he have a sense of humor, but he's very clever in how he does these things.
I know. And I think, I think that would be great if it turns out to be that way. I know that Lindsey Graham has spoken out recently, and Lindsey Graham's a senator from South Carolina, and basically has said, I think President Trump is in a great position right now to help the people of Iran. And when we do it, let's just do the opposite of what Obama did. I mean, literally, that's what Graham said. And by that, he means get involved.
Right.
Don't just talk, act about it. Don't just talk about helping the people or wanting to help the people. And even tweeting, he was saying with President Trump, you got to do more than tweeting. And he felt you got to go back in there and nullify that agreement because it's not working. It never was good and meant to work. And let's get a new agreement and then let's move on. And Linda says, Jehovah with a surprise, and it has.
Well, this is going to be one of those very few times that I agree with Lindsey Graham. Doesn't happen often, but this is one of those times that I do agree with him on that. And I want to think that that's where this is headed. But again, it may be that they're waiting to see how committed the Iranian people are to carrying through with this, because in the end, it's going to be them. It's going to be, if it's going to happen, they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to bring about this change. However, if they know that the strongest nation on the face of the earth is in support of what's happening, I'm sure that would help bolster their morale.
Yeah. And, one of the things that the media is talking about, and, I've been harping about this for weeks now. The one thing that the media has pointed out is that the women of Iran are leading the charge in the protest. So I, that's in my thing of, again, this is the media wanting to women are superior, men are not. It was that's the type of theme that they're running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can see, and I don't necessarily know that I disagree with the women being in charge over there and running this protest, because I think the women have been the ones that have been, so humiliated, so, disrespected, for
oppressed.
All these years. Oppressed. Thank you. Yes. And we've seen the images of the woman with the hijab and just with the flag on a stick with the hijab, waving it back and forth, and women going up. And I saw this myself on a video, women going up to the men there and, pointing their fists at them and saying, you've pointed your fists at us. Now let's get in here and fight with us, And so when you've kicked somebody down so far and so long, pretty soon they're going to rise up and they're going to come back against you. And the women, in this regard, have more of a reason to rise up even more so than the men in Iran, although I think they have good reason too. Now, Marlene said, I'm sure the CIA is behind the scenes too in Iran.
Well, a couple things while you were talking that came to my mind. Let me comment on the CIA thing real quick. Uh-huh. This started literally within hours of an announcement coming out that the United States and Israel were kind of getting together to see how to deal with Iran. And then, boom, who knows what was going on behind the scenes? I don't. Perhaps the CIA is involved. But now going on to something you were just talking about, the women predominantly leading this uprising. Another Bible story comes to mind. And again, it happened in ancient Persia. And when God's people were threatened with annihilation, it was a woman that God used to deliver his people. It was a woman who had to gather her courage and go in and face the king and expose the plot and how somebody was trying to destroy her and her people. So, throughout history, God has used women, just like he's used men. And sometimes God has used women because men wouldn't rise to the occasion. Yeah. Right. So again, what's going on behind the scenes, I can't be 100% certain, but I think it is fascinating that the images that are coming out, like the woman with the hijab, it's happening in Persia, where Esther was used by God to deliver her people. So it's just interesting.
And it's funny because in the 70s when the uprising happened in Iran, I didn't see women doing that then. I mean, maybe they came out and they were totally, covered and they were protesting, but they were not leading it. They were there in the bunch of people. There were no standouts with the women. It was mostly the men there. So I think that this is a different time. And again, women are seeing, I think in Iran, because they didn't used to have to wear the hijabs. They didn't used to have this tyranny that they were living under. So they know what freedom looks like, and they've had a taste of it. And they're looking around the country and they're saying, wait a minute, this is not what I want anymore. And not that they ever did want it, but it's like, now's the time we need to do something about it. And I think that's why that we see women are coming forward and doing that right now. And Linda said, are there any discussions at the UN about this uprising? I haven't seen or heard anything. I haven't seen
one thing going on in the UN about this. Nothing.
Yeah. Not surprising.
No, that's not surprising, is it?
No.
Boy, there was a thought that it came in this side of my brain and it exited right this out. Side. That it'll come back to me in just a moment. But
and the thing too, here's kind of what I want to ask is that how much should we be involved in Iran? Because, there's a lot of people who think we should stay out of other countries altogether. We should let them do what they want to do and we shouldn't get involved. People I don't think are really ready, willing, and able to go back and get in another war. And let's say there is a regime change. Are we going to be doing that again? And then it's going to be, well, you're only doing it because of the oil. It's the same stuff over and over, the same scenario.
Yeah, I know. That's a hard question to answer, to be honest with you, because things could spiral out of control. We've already seen how that works. Things can spiral out of control real quick. Where Iraq is concerned, for instance, we tried the regime change there, but you trace it all the way back in its history. Iraq has never been anything remotely close to a republic or where, people self-govern. They've always been under a despot, all the way back to Genesis 10, Nimrod, Nebuchadnezzar, later on Alexander came. It's always been under a despot. They don't really know how to live in a self-governed scenario. Where Persia is concerned, or Iran, I think the same argument could be made to a degree, although, as you said, under the Shah for decades, Iran was, I wouldn't say it was a religious, morally, righteous nation necessarily, but it was very secular. But at least,
Right.
People could kind of, live a life without being under somebody's thumb. So they, like you said, they've tasted that, at least in the last 50 years. They kind of remember what that was like. So how should we get involved? Only way I know how to answer that question is if this is about freedom and liberty and I want to raise my family the way I think I should raise my family. I want to worship the way I think I should be able to worship, etc. Then aren't we glad that France got involved back in the 1770s and the 1780s? They didn't have forces on the ground necessarily. They had a few people here and there, Lafayette and a few others that were fighting alongside of colonials. But they didn't put forces on the ground. They did use their navy to blockade Yorktown, which kind of provoked the surrender of Lord Cornwallis to George Washington, which effectively brought an end to the American Revolution and Britain's presence here in what would become the United States. So can other countries get involved in a limited way to further and advance the causes of liberty and freedom? Yes. Should we do that? I would like to see us do that to the extent that we don't necessarily put young men and women against their will in harm's way. I would like to see us use our influence and power and forces, to a degree to, at the very least, encourage those that are actually on the ground, the Persians, the ones who are actually going to benefit or not benefit from this, to encourage them, yes, we're behind you, but you need to make this happen. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it's, that's a really difficult thing to do because they're not armed against their government, and they don't have the ability to fight them. So without support, I don't know how they overtake the government unless the government itself says we're going to work with you and we're going to overthrow the government. I don't see that happening. And
can I interrupt that
thought
and just remember that the colonial army initially, when the shot heard around the world was fired, it was guys carrying, these little muskets and squirrel guns and pitchforks and whatever they could find to arm themselves, They didn't win the war that day, but they initiated something. And what I'm trying to say here is there's no way logically that the colonials should have won that war.
Yeah.
They were going up against the most powerful force then on earth.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way logically they should have been able to do that. But that's where God gets involved. So I want to make sure that people understand. I'm not saying this is a thus says the Lord. I'm speculating here. I'm just kind of trying to figure out what's going on here. But if God is behind the scenes orchestrating things, and if he is giving people that have been oppressed, who are calling and crying out to the one true God, not Allah, but calling out to the God of Israel for justice and for righteousness, then people with pitchforks and waving hijabs on sticks can accomplish a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you in that regard. Yeah, if God is behind this, then they're supposed to win, they will win. There's no doubt. Here's something that Vice President Pence said. Maybe give it a little bit more information of where the United States kind of sees this and where they're going. He said, as long as Donald Trump is president and I am vice president, the United States of America will not repeat the shameful mistake of our past when others stood by and ignored the heroic resistance of the Iranian people as they fought against their brutal regime. The bold and growing resistance of the Iranian people today gives hope and faith to all who struggle for freedom and against tyranny. We must not and we will not let them down. Those are pretty strong words.
Yeah, they are very strong words. And, I know he's the vice president, but I don't think he says that unless he's got the consent to say that. So pretty strong words.
Yeah. So, just hearing that says to me that in the event that, And I don't know how far we'd have to be pushed to do it, but military action may be taken if it gets to a certain point and it looks like there's maybe a tipping point, perhaps. I don't know. I hope not, but I don't know.
Well, again, I wouldn't want to see our young men and women have to be on the ground, so to speak.
Right.
But I think there are, in this day, with the technology that we have, there are things that we can do to assist without necessarily putting a young man or a young woman in the forefront, so to speak, or on the front line.
Sanctions certainly might be one thing that the United States would try to do. And then we're doing that against North Korea. So, and trying to get other nations to join in with us on doing sanctions.
Hey, I wanted to know, have you heard if Linda Sarsour, or whatever her name is,
Sarsour,
has she caught a flight to Tehran yet to get at the front of this, this uprising?
I'm waiting for all the feminists to get on the plane and go over there and help their sisters in Iran.
Right. I actually heard that there was a fella out of, I think it was in Australia, was willing to start a GoFundMe site to pay for all of her expenses. That they would take care of it.
I will donate to that in a heartbeat. I'll just go take everything in my bank account and put it right in there. Please, Linda, go, because that would be your first trip.
Right. I haven't really heard her speak out on this, so I'm just curious.
And she's had time because it's been going on for about 5 or 6 days now. So she's had time to, put something together and get out there and have a speech.
Yeah, I don't know that there have been 5 or 6 days in the last few years that she's kept quiet about anything. So it's kind of interesting. I
know. She could wear her little pink hat with her hijab and go on over there and see what they have to say, and see how long. Right. How long that lasts. I want to kind of ask people too that are joining the show today what your thoughts are, if you want to share them, about us possibly United States going into Iran and military action or anything of that nature. Would you be for it or against it? Or what are your thoughts about Iran? Marlene said, cracking me up. Good point there, Bill. In regard to Linda Sarsour. Oh my God.
She's on my list. If you haven't guessed yet, she's on my list. So
now Marlene said she would not be for us going into Iran and doing something.
Well, I don't think I would be for us committing ground forces. No, I wouldn't be for that either. I might be for other shows of power though.
Yeah, that's going to be difficult. Again, that's a really difficult thing to do. And I know right now Iran is sort of ramping things up because they're saying that you, Israel, and you, United States, you're the ones behind this protest. You're the ones that are making them angry. And Marlene is saying, let them fight. And again, my viewpoint about that is if God isn't behind them, their fighting may be for naught. I mean, it may be that they lose the battle now and win the war later. I don't know. But, it's kind of a scary thing. You're saying, go ahead and do something, but we're not really going to help you. And Marlene is saying all up for peripheral help, kind of like where you're at, Bill, on that.
Yeah, I think there are things that could be done. And I think there are people probably planning those kinds of things right now. And so, I think that there are things that could be done. And I think if we're really for liberty and freedom and for the oppressed, there are things that should be done. Again, would we be here today as a nation if God had not used the French to lend assistance? Things could have possibly worked out different. He could have done it a different way, but that's how he did it. He had people assist us, and not necessarily with boots on the ground, but with peripheral help, to use the term that was used here.
Yeah, and think about if you had something where you had a regime change in Iran, what would the impact be around the world about that? Right now, Iran and Russia are working together, Iran and North Korea are working together, and you do a regime change, all that potentially falls apart. That would have a huge impact.
Right. And which is why I say God, man has his agenda and then God has his. Mm-hmm. I would also add to that thought this one. When the Soviet Union fell, I wholeheartedly believe that what that was really all about was giving the people behind the Iron Curtain an opportunity, not necessarily to get a McDonald's, but to worship freely for the release of so many Jewish people who were in the gulags and who were oppressed under the Soviets to make aliyah to Israel. So, and then as that began to wind down, then you begin to see the Putins and these kinds of guys, the ex-KGB showing back up in positions of power. In other words, what I'm trying to say is the Soviets or the oppressed under the Soviet Union were given a window of opportunity. But then the window eventually closes.
Right.
So if I had to guess at what's going on here, and this is exactly what it is, a guess, God may be giving a window of opportunity to those people who are oppressed in Iran. But the window will eventually close.
Yeah.
Because eventually Persia will come against Israel with this confederation of other nations. You understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I do.
So perhaps this is, and I'm sorry to cut you off, perhaps this is one of the strongest indicators we've had so far that these things that are described for us in the book of Ezekiel, for instance, are actually getting ready to take shape. But God's going to give people, innocent people who want him and want to be able to, be released from their oppression. He's going to give them a window of opportunity. He's going to give them opportunity to go freely through the country of Iran and to spread the gospel unhindered. And saying that, I get goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah. And think about this too, because in Bible prophecy at the end times, it's supposed to be, from what I understand, Russia and Iran are going to be two of the major countries going against Israel. So if Iran has a change of regime and a change of heart, that won't occur, at least not right away. So I mean that could prevent that from happening now instead of as of 20 years down the road or whatever.
Perhaps again we're just speculating. Here, but I do think it's important to consider that there are believers in Iran. And there are people who are not believers that God wants to reach with the truth. He's going to give everybody an opportunity to hear the truth. So again, we'll have to wait and see how this all works out. But if that's what's going on, then absolutely I think that the United States should, to a degree, get involved to show support for those. And by the way, who many of them may be secular. Maybe they don't want anything to do with religion. That really has nothing to do with it. It's about if there is a regime change where people can actually live their lives without an oppressive government over them, it will give opportunity for the gospel to be spread through the country of Iran. And then the window would probably begin to close. When? I don't know. Yeah. I'm saying this not as a thus says the Lord, but I can see what might be happening here from a spiritual point of view.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, it could be that the only thing that's going to happen here is that there's a window of opportunity for people to share the gospel with other people in Iran. And then that's it. Then nothing else changes. Iran stays exactly the way it is.
That's the way it happened in the Soviet Union. I mean, there was a regime change, if you want to call it that. But look who's back in power now.
Yeah.
Right? The same people, more or less, who were in power before the Soviet Union fell. It's just not called the Soviet Union anymore. It's called Russia, which is another interesting point. Iran is kind of a modern name. What happens if there was a regime change and they revert back to the old name of Persia? Because I've always wondered about this, Susan. Why does the Bible continue to call them Persia when it's happening in the future at the end of days? But today there is no official Persia.
I know.
It's interesting to see what's going to happen.
Now, Linda said God gives all people and nations a window of opportunity. At least we have an excuse when we stand before him in the end. And Marlene was saying here that we sit back, watch God work, and unbelievers are losing their minds over what's happening. and it's true, because there's no way that they can explain it. If you don't know Christ, you can't explain it.
Well, I may be stepping out of line here, but, I'm thinking about if Obama's motive for giving the Iranians all that money was really, an indirect way of trying to stack the deck against Israel. And now this is happening. If this actually undermines the Iranian government and all that kind of falls by the wayside, I would like to be a fly on the wall when he realizes that his agenda has come to nothing, because that was going to be part of his legacy.
Right.
Obamacare and the Iranian deal, that was going to be part of his legacy. His legacy is crumbling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do they say? You can't get good fruit from a bad tree. I mean, the motives were bad. If the motives were bad, and it's not going to produce anything good, and eventually it's just going to fall apart, because it's if it goes against Israel, especially, it's going to fall apart. We know that. So, but I think all of this is very interesting. I wish the media would report on it more, but of course they're not going to. So don't expect it. You're going to have to go to different places and find it. And continue to listen to what's going on in the Middle East, in Iran. And it's very important to know that, because it is associated with end times. It's something that we should know about and learn about.
Well, before we move to something else, let's make this, I think, important observation or point. And that is, we've been talking about what the United States should do, might do in support of this. What might Israel do?
I know. True.
In support of this? Yeah.
It would be great to see. And I know that Israel feels about the people the same way that we do. And even Netanyahu said, the being accused of making those people protest and being behind that, he said it's laughable, and he wasn't even going to address it because it was disrespectful to the people of Iran. And he's right, and so, I think they are keeping their eye on what's going on, and maybe a bigger help even than we would be, and that would be your peripheral help coming in there instead of the United States. Here comes Israel, and that would be great. And Israel and Iran used to be friends.
Well, there was a large Jewish population in Iran before the Islamic Revolution. And there aren't very many Iranian or Persian Jews left there, but there still are some there. And, there's a lot of quote unquote holy sites in Iran that are not Muslim holy sites. Mm-hmm. They're, biblical personalities, that are supposedly buried in Persia, Esther being one of them, So there are righteous seeds that have been sown in Persia. And anytime there's a righteous seed sown in its appropriate season and time, God will allow that to flourish and bear fruit. And I just, in my gut sense, that's what's really going on here.
Yeah, and that's great if it is. I'm all for that. And I think God has, I agree with you. God does have his hand on what's going on, and where it goes. I have no idea. How it will end will probably be totally different than what we imagine.
Probably so.
Because that's what God always does.
He always does it that way. That's true.
I know.
True.
And I wanted to talk a little bit in the last few minutes that we have. We have, a few minutes more, but I want to turn to something that's going on in California again, only because I see this as a huge issue for people. And it's something that I think all states need to look out for this coming to a neighborhood near them. Let me give you the situation here. There's a 41-year-old man in California who sent 5 label them anti-Muslim posts to the Islamic Center of Southern California. Now, why is this important? Because every state practically that I know of has some type of Islamic center. And if they don't, there's a national center that everybody typically has the internet, or they can go to Facebook and they can contact those centers there. So what this man did is that he went online, went to the Facebook page of this Islamic center and made 5 posts. And the state of California, the California Attorney General's office, argued that the comments constituted repeated contact by means of an electronic communication device with intent to annoy or harass, which is in California is a misdemeanor. And here's what he said, and I want to get your thoughts and the thoughts of people's comments that are listening to the show here. Here's what he said. The terror hike sounds like fun in reference to the center's advertised sunset hike that was coming up. And the next thing he said was, the more Muslims we allow into America, the more terror we will see. Practice in the third comment, practicing Islam can slow or even reverse the process of human evolution. Number 4, Islam is dangerous. Fact. The more Muslim savages we allow into America, the more terror we will see. This is a fact which is undeniable. And the 5th comment, filthy Muslim S word with a T, ending in T. Filthy Muslim S word has no place in Western civilization. Now, looking at those comments, I would say absolutely, they're rude comments. They're very, rude comments.
Somebody picking for a fight.
Somebody picking for a fight. Now, do we look at this? Do we go so far as to say this man should be charged with a misdemeanor because of repeated contact with intent to annoy or harass and be charged with a misdemeanor?
No. I mean, as what's the word I'm looking for here? Classless as some of his comments were.
Right.
Nevertheless, we supposedly live in a country where you have freedom of speech, even if it's speech that I don't like. Now, would I recommend people doing things like that? No. That's not a believer's approach to anything like that. So I would just, I don't look upon this or his comments favorably.
Right.
However, does he have the right to make those stupid comments? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, he does. I mean, if Madonna can get up on a stage and talk about blowing up the White House, or if Kathy Griffin can hold up a severed head that is supposed to be emblematic of the president and say god awful things, and if all these liberals and these people in the Hollywood Hills can say all these awful, awful things publicly, okay, then somebody else ought to be able to say these kinds of things publicly. Do we condone any of it? No, we do not. But it boils down to, should I have the freedom of speech to say what I believe? If he makes threats, okay, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Okay.
None of those are threatening. None of them saying, I'm going to come and destroy your center. I'm going to kill people. I'm going to hurt people. I see none of that in the comments that he supposedly made.
Yeah. Well, he's somebody looking for a fight. That's not real wise.
Right.
Especially if you live in California. I mean, come on, you live in the People's Socialist Republic of California. Probably not the best idea to start doing stuff like that. But, and by the way, what starts in California eventually works its way east and permeates the rest of the country. So what the real issue here is that the mullahs are in California too, so to speak. And they're going to put down anything that they deem to be offensive or whatever the terminology they're using, while protecting the kind of speech that furthers their agenda.
Yeah. And the way I look at it is it is one-sided. This is an Islamic center. And so they're going to protect them because they're looking at this as, they didn't label this hate speech, but they might as well have said, this is bordering on hate speech. We don't want it. And so we're going to cut you off of being able to say anything. And again, this shouldn't be, in my mind, a protected class of people that have to be protected even when it's not hate speech. And then who is going to determine, one, that it's hate speech? And in this case, if that were a determination, it'd be the California Attorney General is going to make that determination. And this Attorney General has already made the determination that this is a misdemeanor and an annoyance and a harassment.
Well, look, the guy should have the right to say things, even if they are stupid.
Right.
But, you live in a situation, you live in a scenario, California, where you know what people are like politically, how they're going, it's not really wise to do things like this. And so as a believer living in America, we have to remember that the Messiah told us we have to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And what I've always taken that to mean is, think before you speak, think before you act, don't come across as being in somebody's face. That's just going to cause them to dig in their heels. That's not really the way to get things done. There's a way to fight. There's a way to stand up for what's right. And picking a fight, I don't think that's the right way to go about it. That's my opinion. But that being said, the California government should not bring misdemeanor charges against this guy for speaking his mind.
Yeah. And basically what they're saying is this is harassment. This would be like somebody getting on the phone and making 500 phone calls. And again, this is 5 comments, number one. Number two,
Facebook page.
On a Facebook page, a public Facebook page.
That's what happens on Facebook, right? I mean, that's why Facebook exists, for people to say stupid stuff.
Right. I've had worse comments against me on Twitter and Facebook than these right here. I would have welcomed these. So,
right.
So I think, and if you don't like somebody making comments on your public page, you simply block them.
Ban them.
Ban them after the first comment, you're done.
Right.
There's no harassment. This was sending a message loud and clear that because this is a Muslim related center, we are in California are going to look at what you're doing. We're not allowing you to have free speech. And that's exactly what happened here. If this were a church, I don't think anything would have been said. If this was on the church's Facebook page, nobody would have even mentioned it, even recognized it.
I believe you're right. But I would also say this: if you're upholding the truth will be able to withstand the accusations and, the ranting and railing of all of those people who are trying to disparage the truth. If you're not upholding the truth, then you really can't afford for people to put too many accusations out there, because some of those accusations eventually will stick. So, we're going to have to endure these ongoing accusations as believers and all these disparagements. But you know what? The truth can handle it. A lie can't.
Yeah. And while I disagree with the way this man wrote it, and as a believer, I wouldn't write something like this. No. As a person who, a former practicing attorney, I would defend this man, because I agree with his right as a First Amendment right to say whatever he wants to say within reason. And this, while it's rude, while it's ridiculous, while it's a dumb thing to do, it is also protected, I think, by First Amendment, and he should be allowed to say it.
Well, I guess that's one of the great things about the Constitution, isn't it? Is that it gives us the right to be stupid.
Yeah, exactly. And if we don't defend him and his right to do this, then in our rights, when we are acting as believers and saying things that are true, but other people may not like, we'll get our rights violated if we don't stand up for this person's rights.
Well, and I think the essence of this is that, again, those who have a godless mindset, as far as I'm concerned, are trying to intimidate people into, not this guy, but going to use this guy to intimidate people like you or me or whoever into not saying anything.
Exactly. Right.
Not that we would parrot what he said, but to intimidate us into not saying anything.
Anything at all. Yeah. And I think, in California, we're going to see a lot more stuff like this happening. And I bring up California not to have people roll their eyes about it and go, oh my God, it's California. But I do know, as you said and pointed out, what starts in California spreads across the country. It may take a while to get there, but it eventually gets there, and it's not a good thing. And it needs to be stopped in California before we see it, roll across the country. So
no, I agree with that.
And I just, so we're running out of time, I want to thank everybody for your comments today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. I would ask that you share this with everybody, put it in email, share it with your family, share it on Facebook, share it everywhere. And we appreciate you being here on the second day of the new year. Thank you so much. God bless you. And we'll see you back here again next week. Take care.
Send some of that California warmth this way.
Exactly. Take care, everybody.